In the contemporary context of multiple simultaneous environmental crises, the overarching aim of this project is to illustrate how ecological self-realization is key in order to support the collective shift from a disassociated to a relational way of thinking and being on planet Earth. Last time, we discussed how human societies had interacted with the natural landscape, broadly in Western civilization during modern times, but this can be expanded to all heavily industrialized civilizations. I conducted an extended interview with Andrew Mangold, founder of World Repair Nursery, where we explored patterns within human society from ecosomatics to agroforestry. The first two chapters of this project presented insights from the realms of deep ecology and ecopsychology. In this chapter, we will contrast this scrutiny with a history of targeted marginalization practices within inner-city communities. This will be aimed at providing a cohesive lens where the roots of our own unconscious may become unearthed. Together, we can begin to learn how to create a real, livable future for all beings. The project will continue to provide a literature review surrounding what has influenced my views on environmentalism and ethics, while exploring how human societies have interacted with the natural landscape. We will look toward both rural and urban areas, attempting to tackle equity issues surrounding access to nature, navigating modern life in the Anthropocene era, along with exploring the great potentials of biomimicry, multi-strata agroforestry, and examples of climate-positive case studies. I aim to connect ideas from deep ecology, ecopsychology, permaculture design, and socioeconomics. It all ties back to my profession as an adventure educator and living within a rapidly shifting world at the brink of revelation. You are now listening to Ecological Curiosities. A shameful inequity of trees. We probably know subconsciously that people need to be connected with nature. This gets reflected in the social, political, and economic structures of the urban landscape where systemic racism is still evident. This becomes especially visible with the lack of green spaces in urban centers populated primarily by people of color, the poor, and neighborhoods where they reside. Yet, green spaces are encouraged and maintained in areas of the city where richer, mostly white people in power live. If concrete, metal, and neon signs were what people desire, we would see those in the neighborhoods of those in power. But we don't. Instead, we see a segmented beautification of the urban environment, providing people in power a better opportunity to receive the necessary positive effects of nature connection. A statistician would say that there is a positive correlation between the amount of green visible in an urban neighborhood and the amount of green circulating in the pockets of the communities who live there. In other words, there is a direct connection between ecological health and socioeconomic wealth. The first ever nationwide study, known as the Tree Equity Score, found that neighborhoods mostly occupied by people of color have an average of 33% less tree canopy coverage than communities that are majority white, and neighborhoods with 90% or more of their residents living in poverty have 65% less tree canopy coverage than communities with only 10% or less of their population in poverty. Urban forests are responsible for almost 1/5 of the country's carbon sequestration, yet we do not see ecological and human health being prioritized. Instead, we see this segmented beautification of the urban environment, providing those in power a better opportunity to receive the necessary effects of nature connection, while leaving barren patches where low-income neighborhoods are subjected to a worse standard of living and harsher effects from climate change. Reflecting on the book Radical Ecology, Chapter 4, Critiques of Deep Ecology, the author Carolyn Merchant acknowledges how ecologists who make a sharp distinction between wilderness and anthropocentrism fail to consider that humans are also animals. Moreover, they fail to recognize the ethnocentrism of their own concept as wilderness, as devoid of human presence. Thus, the health of an area's human population, when present, is closely tied to that landscape's ecological health. Numerous studies show a clear relationship between urban tree coverage and population health. Adequate shade tree coverage helps to promote physical activity and mitigate the adverse effects of extreme heat on human health. Unregulated heat exposure can jeopardize the body's ability and capacity to regulate its own internal temperature, which can lead to hyperthermia, heat exhaustion, heat stroke, the worsening of chronic illnesses, and even death. On average, extreme heat has killed more people in the last 10 years than any other weather phenomena. From the National Weather Service, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency estimates that more than 1,300 deaths per year in the United States are due to extreme heat. Found mainly in metropolitan areas, the increase in temperatures from rural sites to central cities is called the urban heat island effect. With climate change bringing increasingly more intense heat waves, the lack of tree coverage in urban spaces has left communities of color even more vulnerable. Trees cool the immediate area around them, not only by providing shade, but also through transpiration or the evaporation of moisture from their leaves. On average, this can cause the surrounding 100 feet to be 3 degrees cooler. Trees also remove fine particulates from the air, allowing residents to breathe easier in their presence. Researchers in Dallas found that heat-related deaths could drop by 22% with a combination of tree canopy coverage and reflective surfaces. The 3 E's of sustainability are equity, social, people, economy, profit, and ecology, environment, and planet. Many scholars of sustainability attest that socioeconomic issues are intrinsically tied to environmental issues. One of the many environmental issues that our country faces is the lack of trees and green spaces in urban areas, specifically those inhabited largely by minorities, people of color, and disadvantaged communities. Services such as urban forest development have been long withheld from these neighborhoods due to the racially skewed and shameful inequity of trees. A recent study conducted through 108 urban settings in the US found that 94% of previously redlined areas were disproportionately exposed to extreme heat. These areas had a temperature increase of 5 degrees in the summer, with some cities having a difference as large as 12 degrees. This shameful inequity of trees now threatens ecology and human life. So far, I've outlined these issues relating primarily to ecology and equity, but have yet to explore the 3rd E of sustainability, economy. What if I told you that everything I've outlined so far is explicitly linked to economic power? Cornell Law School defines redlining as a discriminatory practice that consists of the systemic denial of services to residents of certain areas based on their race or ethnicity. Neighborhoods containing larger populations of minorities were literally outlined in red on maps and classified as potentially hazardous to investment. This included both biotic and economic investment. Urban green development was denied. Businesses and employers were discouraged from positioning themselves in these locations, while mortgages, insurance loans, and other financial services were denied to their residents. The lasting effects of such discriminatory redlining practices are still prevalent in today's cities and urban communities. However, research finds that having just 10 more trees within a given city block can improve residents' perception of their own health in ways comparable to an increase in annual personal income of $10,000, or being 7 years younger. This also decreases the risk of cardiometabolic conditions in ways comparable to an increase in annual personal income of $20,000. $100,000. It's no way redlining discrimination has persisted in this way when the presence of trees provides health benefits equivalent to an increase in social class, personal health, and overall well-being. Critical links between employment and equity issues and ecological issues are clear and conclusive. The connections between the 3 E's of sustainability, ecology, and socioeconomic issues should now be visibly defined. The principles in deep ecology point towards the importance of reducing human populations to permit all biotic life forms and ecosystems to flourish. In Critiques of Deep Ecology section of Radical Ecology, Carolyn Merchant recognizes how some deep ecologists accept the Malthusian premise that the root of the problem is too many people. More than 900 million people are presently malnourished or starving, and hunger spreads with rising numbers. But Malthusian empiricism sees many hungry mouths and concludes that there are too many people and not enough resources to keep them alive. The truth is, abundance is a natural part of design, and so is resilience. Biomimicry sees biotic life as a catalyst for human innovation and design, while permaculture seeks to emulate natural systems in growing food and managing land resources. The systems design mentality and approach acknowledges the complexity of ecosystems and optimizes land use for productivity, fertility, and resilience. Abundance is a birthright of all people. There would be much more than enough shared resources if we were living in ecological harmony with the landscape, with an egalitarian resource distribution system. The problem with population growth and social inequity is that the two go hand in hand. The reality is that the driving force behind rampant population growth is actually social inequity. Out of every 100 people added to this planet, 97 are born in the third world. The reason these numbers are so much higher in underdeveloped countries is because of their lack of health care or governmental services like retirement through Social Security. The mean population increase in first world industrialized countries is about 1.7 children each generation, whereas poorer countries average 3.6. In theory, a population increase of 2.1 children per couple would keep the population size relatively stable. However, the individual's need for more children increases in underdeveloped countries, where issues like disease and famine are much more widespread. In order to ensure a continuation of their bloodline and to be taken care of in their old age, one must have many children, in hopes that some of them will survive and be able to take on the responsibilities in the homestead and the community. In order for concerns about population growth to be addressed, we must first stand for ecological equity. Human socioeconomic equity is inherently ecological equity. To decrease population size in accordance with the carrying capacity of the land and allow space for all ecosystems to flourish, we must first address the root of the problem, which is the social inequity of people's standard of living globally. Living in the Anthropocene era. Anthropocentrism is a worldview which includes nature as a reflection of human-identified qualities and use values. The word literally means human-centered and stems from the ethical belief that human beings alone possess intrinsic value. In an anthropocentric worldview, all other beings hold value only in their ability to serve humans, or in their instrumental value. Within this belief structure, all other things, individual beings, living systems, and the environment are means to human ends. Today, human societies have tilled, planted, grazed, paved, excavated, built towns and cities across at least 40% of the Earth's surface. Such activities have caused profound changes to occur within the Earth's soil, atmosphere, and oceans. Human impacts on nature have become so extensive that it has been declared that the planet has entered a new geological epoch. Scholars in many disciplines have come to refer to the current historical period as the Anthropocene, a distinct era in which human activity is reshaping the planet in permanent ways. Many modern human activities actively disrupt and threaten our world's ecological balance, and we do not need to wait to see the effects. For example, a massive island of plastic twice the size of Texas floats in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Pollution of this scale, combined with overfishing and rising global water temperatures, has caused a 50% decline in marine populations over the last 50 years. According to the World Wildlife Fund, such sobering realities are characteristic of today's Anthropocene era, which has been called the Earth's sixth major extinction, caused entirely by human actions. Although the process of global warming began with industrialization in the 1700s, fully half of the excess greenhouse gases have been released in just the last 30 years after the onset of hyperglobalization. What this means is that there's still time to change the course of human history and restore our precious home. Smart growth and urban food forests. Known as multi-strata agroforestry, permaculture-type food forests are a system which mimics the structure of a natural forest. These polycultures promote biodiversity by providing diverse habitats for a variety of organisms, fostering ecological health, improving soil fertility, and achieving high rates of both carbon sequestration and food production. Where industrialized food systems use unsustainable practices contributing to climate change, natural resource depletion, and economic disparities, food forests have the potential to provide social, cultural, and environmental services, healthy food, livelihood opportunities, spaces for education, recreation, and community building. In the spirit of mixed-use, smart urban planning, I believe we should be looking towards integrated food systems, where a given community or eco-district can eventually subsist largely off of what has been grown on site. With an indefinitely growing population comes the challenge of providing infrastructure for those people, in the form of both housing and food supply. One of the major issues we see with urban sprawl is that in an effort to provide housing accommodations, cities often expand outward, often ruining prime agricultural land. Once the land has been developed on, it becomes quite difficult to remediate the previously fertile state that is effectively lost. Mixed-use zoning is a prominent technique which has been used to combat some of the pitfalls of urban sprawl. Zoning regulations developed after World War II as an attempt to secure public health. By separating residential, commercial, and industrial areas, pollutions from factories could be kept further away from the places where people live. A major issue with single-use zoning is that it restricts travel between home, work, school, shopping, and recreation, largely to the use of private automobiles. Because of this, mixed-use zoning hasn't emerged in an attempt to remedy the need for private transportation. Mixed-use zoning is characterized by walkable neighborhoods with nearby stores, community gardens, and public parks, which promote physical activity and social cohesion. While this method of smart growth is a much more viable approach to urban planning, it largely fails to consider the dietary needs of a growing population. I should be clear in prefacing this that this crucial need has not been entirely disregarded. To preserve open space, farmland, natural beauty, and critical environmental areas is one of the 10 basic principles for smart growth, developed and legislated by former Maryland State Governor Paris Glendening and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Although this might seem quite positive at first glance, and it certainly is, the method described here actually suffers from similar issues to single-use zoning. We'll live our human lives over here and grow the majority of our food over there separately. Now these crops must be transported, packaged, and shipped to your local grocery market, which relies heavily on imported foods from distances far, far away. Whatever happens to the idea of mixed use? Climate positive case studies. Researchers from the Natural Capital Project at Stanford University performed case studies on existing food forests in San Antonio, Texas, to examine the benefits of urban agriculture and multistrata agroforestry. In 2020, Councilwoman Melissa Cabello Haverda filed a council consideration request asking the City Council identify city code barriers to urban farms. A success, the City Council's Governance Committee established a task force to investigate which laws needed to be changed to allow for urban farming. Thanks to their efforts, organizations like the Food Policy Council of San Antonio, FPCSA, have been allowed to start urban agriculture projects for community reinvigoration. Creating a friendly legal framework for food forests is a foundationally important part of the solution. Tamok's Talom Food Forest was planted in 2021 at Padre Park on the south side of San Antonio. The project was funded through FPCSA, an all-volunteer nonprofit dedicated to improving equitable access to fresh, healthy, and sustainably grown food. The food forest, in its early stages, was not yet producing a yield at the time of the study in 2023. Once the forest has matured, the Natural Capital Project estimates that it has the potential to provide 3/4 pound of fresh fruit and nuts per week to each of the 473 surrounding households, relying on Supplemental Nutrition Assistance or SNAP benefits. In April 2023, over 120,000 individuals were enrolled in SNAP benefits in Bexar County alone, according to the Texas Department of Health and Human Services. Another case study on the south side of San Antonio, Via Coronado Park, became the site for a new food forest as a collaboration between the city's Metropolitan Health District and Parks and Rec Department. According to the analysis by Stanford University, 50% of households in the park's surrounding areas are low income, and 23 of them rely on those SNAP benefits. Researchers estimate that the food forest will produce more than $500,000, $500,000 worth of food per year with proper maintenance. This could provide an average of 3 3/5 pounds of fresh fruit and nuts per week to each of the surrounding 536 households relying on those SNAP benefits. Alternatively, it could provide 178 households with the full recommended daily allotment of fruit and 30 households with the full recommended daily allotment of nuts each year. This model assumed a fully developed 8.86-acre urban food forest in the park, encompassing all of the current underdeveloped space. Researchers used the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, dietary guidelines and the World Health Organization's recommendation of 400 grams of fresh fruit and vegetables daily for an average person. This model also assumes that each household is composed of 4 people, all consuming the recommended 400 grams of fresh fruit and vegetables each day. Multistrata agroforestry projects such as this one can also address the city's environmental concerns, including heat islands, climate change, flood retention, and the need for healthy green space access. In addition to the food itself, urban food forests provide many key ecosystem services. In this example, Via Coronado's park's co-benefits would include 162 metric tons of carbon sequestration, which is over $8,400 in societal value, $2,300 per year in decreased cooling costs for surrounding communities within 1 kilometer, and a roughly 2.7% reduction in flood volume on the site in the event of a 100-year storm. Overall, multistrata agroforestry projects across the city have the potential to increase carbon storage by up to, get this, 340 metric tons. That would be an equivalent of $17.6 million. And this uses the conservative social cost of carbon at $53 per metric ton, from the Interagency Working Group on the Social Cost of Greenhouse Gases. $17.6 million. Multi-strata agroforestry may provide less food by weight than traditional urban farms, yet food forests hold similar value due to these co-benefits described. This study done by Stanford University's Natural Capital Project provides a full conversion scenario as a useful framework for envisioning the potential benefits of large-scale implementation. By converting all available underutilized lands equal to or greater than 1 acre in size in the city of San Antonio, residents would reap the benefits of upwards of 192 million pounds of food per year, worth $995 million. Let's go. Enough to feed 314,000 households. 314,000 households fully fed. That's what I'm talking about. Additionally, the living system would provide $35 million worth of cooling services which mitigate the urban heat island effect, reducing heat-based mortalities by 0.04%. Although that sounds small, that is statistically equivalent to saving roughly 600 lives. Not to mention access to healthy green spaces, flood retention, nutrient retention, and carbon sequestration. In conclusion, urban food forests can be extremely productive. This is true even in areas of the city which are highly developed. This study shows how there is ample opportunity to address local food demands with very local solutions. This study also revealed how linking supply, underutilized public lands, with demands, households facing food insecurity, can help to guide decision makers to implement multi-strata agroforestry where it would be most beneficial. By supporting vulnerable communities, urban planners can continue building equity in the city. San Antonio is a pilot city for the Natural Capital Project, and their development of a user-friendly toolkit for urban planners to explore how different development scenarios would affect the equitable distribution of nature's benefits. This new work is funded by the National Aeronautics and Space Agency, NASA's Environmental Equity and Justice Program. This team is currently constructing a web application where users can hypothetically change parcels on a map to see how those changes might affect the delivery of selected benefits. This work has major implications for the future of smart growth in urban planning and the thrivability of humanity at large. Dr. Cirien Saadeh is an educator, community organizer, and community-trained journalist who works at the intersections of journalism, social movement development, experiential education, and sustainability. Saadeh has written for local, national, and international publications and is committed to using community journalism and community journalism education to build power and deconstruct systems of oppression in historically marginalized communities. She hosts the Community Justice Hour radio show and the podcast on Frogtown Community Radio. She is a professor at Prescott College, and she is someone who I have been working closely with over the course of this project as a mentor. Welcome, Cirien. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be on the podcast and to see everything you've done with it over the last few episodes.
Most wonderful. Well, earlier in this chapter, we explored how class capitalism is represented within urban landscapes, where damages from targeted marginalization practices like redlining are still apparent. Legacies like these have historically determined who has access to which physical spaces. In my observation, by creating a segmented beautification of the urban landscape. In your observation, Cirien, how else have those in power tried to determine who has access to which physical space?
Yeah. This is, I'm from Minneapolis, St. Paul. Grew up in the St. Paul area, went to school there, undergrad, it's home. Spent about 10 plus years working in North Minneapolis. North Minneapolis is a predominantly Black community in Minneapolis. It's a historically Black community. If you look at old city planning maps from the 1930s for Minneapolis, you'll see that the neighborhood was literally built to be a slum. That's how it was labeled. The intention in the 1930s by the city of Minneapolis City Council was to turn North Minneapolis into a poor neighborhood. And they did that in lots of ways. And even decades later, when the highways got built, they surround the community. But what you might not know is Minnesota is we're the land of 10,000 lakes. We're a community where basically lake culture, water culture is just part of who we are as a people. Whether it's the dead of winter and you go ice fishing, or summer and it's 95 degrees and you're jumping in the water or taking the boat out, or just anything. Water culture is a huge part of it. Minnesota is actually a really interesting, it's a Dakota word, and it means land where water reflects the sky. It's a really lovely idea. On the still days, you'll go by the lakes and you'll literally see on the clear days that the sun and the sky is reflected in the clear water. It's really weird because you'll see the trees and you'll see the sky and you'll see the sun and you'll see them reflected in the top of the lake.
Yeah.
And it's a really lovely phenomenon. It's one of my favorite parts of Minnesota. North Minneapolis is, I believe, the only neighborhood in Minneapolis, possibly only Phillips, other than North Minneapolis, and Phillips is a low-income immigrant neighborhood, also built out in the 1930s to be a slum, that has limited access to the Mississippi River, which runs between Minneapolis and St. Paul, and almost nobody lives within walking distance of a lake or a pond, which everybody else in Minneapolis basically lives within walking distance of a lake or a pond. If that's not determining who has access to physical space, I don't know what is. I mean, it's such a small example, but given the culture of water and how much that's part of the story we tell ourselves, it feels pertinent to me to say this is a community that has limited access to fresh water spaces. There's, I think, one lake in North Minneapolis, on the border between North and Northeast, Theo Worth. But it feels really crucial to me to understand that, like, in Minnesota, where the Mississippi River runs, this was a community, I did reporting on this for years. There was the Upper Harbor Terminal. The Upper Harbor Terminal was a construction zone that was built on the banks of the Mississippi River in North Minneapolis.
Okay.
So unlike other neighborhoods that have direct access to the river, and I mean like literally walking past it, you could take down to the water, North Minneapolis was blocked by the construction of the Upper Harbor Terminal, by this huge pollution-heavy construction zone that was built along that. And it's only in recent years, after that some of the companies that were operating there shut down, that the city has begun to take down that area, clean up the pollution, and rebuild a public park in that space. So only now, 100 years after the rest of Minneapolis got access to the Mississippi River directly, is North Minneapolis, this predominantly Black community, getting access to the benefits of the Mississippi River. I once reported on this school that it operates out of the north side, and this teacher literally would take students down to the river for the first time because they would live their whole life 2 blocks from the Mississippi River, but blocked from it because of this development and this construction and this company operating on the banks of the river and using that resource. And these students, these were young people who had never, ever gone to the river before. They'd never touched it. And she would take them into the woods. She'd take them down to the river. And it really strikes me. It's such a local example, but this is a community that everybody else in the city and everybody in St. Paul has got access to lakes, ponds, the river. Whether it's the Mississippi River or the Minnesota River, North Minneapolis was cut off from it, whether it was because of the highways or the Upper Harbor Terminal.
And possibly because those people's access didn't matter as much to people in power. And
that's why that old city planning map, they didn't even know when the highways were coming in, but the plan in the 1930s was to build so that the community was enclosed in 3 directions, and that access in and out was from that one way, right? And the city, and then the 4th map was, the 4th side was the river, which was blocked off by the Upper Harbor Terminal.
Wow, that does not sound freeing at all.
Yeah.
Now, you suggested that I look into Just Sustainabilities by Julian Agyeman, a professor of urban and environmental policy and planning, and Fletcher Professor of Rhetoric and Debate at Tufts University. Agyeman notes how the ubiquity of the terms sustainability and sustainable development has also led to contestations over what is to be sustained, by whom and for whom, and what is the most desirable means of achieving this goal. He elaborates by suggesting that the two major challenges to achieving sustainability, sustainable development, and more sustainable communities are the increasing scientization of sustainability and the need to foreground issues of equity and social justice. By scientization, I would infer that Agyeman is referring to standardization. Like Pavel Senkel said in Chapter 1, there isn't just one kind of sustainability. It is something which needs to be seen as adaptive because what is most sustainable will look different for different communities. In respect to the latter half of Agyeman's statement, what do you see as the most crucial ways that regenerative environmental movements should foreground issues of equity and social justice?
I have a few different kind of rules that I live by as a community organizer. As somebody who's worked in food and environmental justice movements for the better part of 20 years, alongside immigration justice, media justice, housing issues, transportation, land use, and there's so many things. No organizer touches a single issue.
Right.
One, when it comes to equity and social justice and regenerative environmental movements, I think it is very easy to forget about the people. I think we do a really good job in environmental movements, and this is possibly quite controversial to say, as environmentalists, we do a really good job of thinking about the environment. Sure. I think we fail to think about the people, and especially the Black and brown communities who have historically cared for that land. We tend to lump all people into an idea that all people are the problem. And that I struggle with that idea.
Yeah, that we're somehow inherently at odds with the natural world.
Yeah.
Like by design.
Yeah, and that people are less important. They're equally important, and I think we don't balance that well. Second, I think, and as somebody, my family's from the Middle East, and I visit back home in our family village in Jordan, and there's a lot of pollution. There was a cement factory there for years. It's closed down. A lot of people got sick from it. Cancer rates were quite high in the community. One of the things that I bring up a lot, and I say this as somebody who's worked in urban communities in the States, but also has a global perspective. Folks who feel disconnected from the land, or who have been disconnected from the land, like we mentioned with North Minneapolis, are going to feel less able to take care of that land.
Right.
So colonization, for example, is a disruptor of the village. My family's country, it's a colonized place. People feel disrupted from the land. People have struggled because the land, the cement factory, was making them sick, right? The resources that were growing there. We need to work in these regenerative environmental movements to rebuild the connection that people have to place. Because when you rebuild that connection between people and place, you rebuild that ability and commitment people have to taking care of that place.
Right.
And you also create the ability for that place to take care of the people, right? That's a bridge that needs to be maintained. And I think it's really easy to think, well, if people's on one side of the bridge and places on the other, then people just have to cross the bridge and do their thing to take care of it. No, because they're not looking at a bridge. They're looking at potholes. And they're going to be like, this is too hard to cross. We can't take care of the land. It hurts us. Or we don't know how to do this. This isn't our place. I want to take care of my place, right? The place that used to be here 100 years ago or 50 years ago. So we have to keep that bridge built and maintained and taken care of, right? Between people and place, so that there's a mutual care that can go back and forth. And that's part of remembering that Black and brown people have taken care of the land for generations. Those stories, I I go through a lot of wild rice because I like to make wild rice in my home. And one of the things I remember in Minnesota a lot is wild rice in Minnesota it's our state grain, right? But it's part of a story we tell ourselves about our connection to the land because of indigenous people, right? When you have a connection to place, you have a connection to what comes from that place. You're more able to take care of it. So we take care of wild rice in Minnesota. We treat it as something sacred because the Dakota people saw it as sacred. That becomes part of who we are as a community, right? And our story. But if you're not learning from people and you're not keeping those bridges to care maintained, it's going to be really hard. We can't have an environmental movement that forgets about people. And we can't have a people first movement that forgets about the fact that the land, the water, the resources, the wind, the soil are just as crucial to our health, our ability to take care of ourselves, our ability to live, our ability to have joy, right? Our ability to be part of a community. I've learned so much from my students here at the college, particularly in the food systems, who are teaching me how to work with my garden and work with what's there. They're teaching me how to take care of myself through my garden. And I'm thinking about the folks in North Minneapolis with Project Sweetie Pie, this group I love there that does a lot of work with young people, teaching young people how to garden, how to love the place they're from by teaching them how to work with the earth as a partner instead of as a user, right? Yeah. And I just think that's so crucial that we are partners, and I think that sense of collaboration sometimes gets lost.
Collaboration.
Yeah, collaboration with the earth, and the earth is collaboration with us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Environmental justice and social justice are mutually reinforcing. Like you've said to me before, we can't forget the needs of people when talking about the environment, and we can't forget the needs of the environment when talking about people. Earlier in the chapter, we explored how food justice networks can act in this way by mutually addressing environmental equity and social justice. In your recent article, Know Thy Neighbor, you researched mutual aid, solidarity, and community care during a time of immigration crackdown in Minnesota. A community-based food justice organization called TC Food Justice was founded over a decade ago by students at the University of Minnesota's School of Public Health. The organization primarily connects surplus food with hunger relief groups that can distribute it. And they are working with roughly 40 schools distributing food that can be passed along to families who are sheltering at home. In your article, you stated how this is like one node in a broader ecosystem of resistance and caretaking in Minnesota. I want to list some of the examples that you've shared with me in this context, starting with the Phillips Roof Depot as a site of potential climate positive case study. This formal federal Superfund site was tainted with arsenic from a 20th century pesticide plant, which required the removal of 50,000 tons of contaminated soil over the course of 10 years. The city bought the property in 2016 as these operations concluded, but the East Phillips Neighborhood Institute advocated for transforming the site into a community-owned indoor urban farm, solar array, and training center, where the city planned to demolish the existing warehouse and expand a public works water facility. Residents and activists, including the Sierra Club, protested that expanding the facility would bring excessive truck traffic and pollution into a neighborhood already experiencing high rates of asthma. As now, the future of the site remains under negotiation, but residents do remain hopeful that the vacant, fenced-off site can be transformed into an eco-friendly hub. At the intersection of food and environmental justice are rising concerns regarding the impacts of overfishing and extractive ocean floor industries like deep-sea mining and shrimp trawling, which results in immense bycatch and heavily degraded ecosystems. One of the organizations you've informed me of which is addressing this is called True Shrimp, a Belton, Minnesota-based indoor aquaculture farm that safely raises shrimp. The organization is reducing the environmental impacts of one of the most heavily consumed animal proteins, shrimp. Another organization I have become informed about through you is Project Sweetie Pie, a North Minneapolis-based nonprofit which focuses on mentoring and empowering youth with agriculture and entrepreneurship skills for establishing urban farms and gardening and distributing fresh produce. Among much more, Project Sweetie Pie advocates for gardens without borders, classrooms without walls, and access to food justice for all. This, among many others, is one of the regenerative avenues which neighborliness can become infrastructure for resistance. I was given a shirt by my permaculture design course, which says,
"Resistance is fertile." Now, viewers can research any of these organizations on their own, so I'd like to ask you about something a bit more personal. That is the farmers market ecosystem within the Twin Cities, as yet another climate-positive case study of resistance and caretaking. You said that you frequent the farmers market at home, so I'd love to hear some more about your organizations or any reflections you have about these other organizations.
Yeah. I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota. Like I said, I moved there when I was 8. I'm almost 39. I just moved to Prescott this past year. But I go back and forth, and I'll be in Minnesota for the summer. And legitimately, my first plan is Saturday morning at the farmers market, St. Paul Farmers Market. I usually spend 3 hours there, sometimes 4. I park in the free parking. I take the pedicab in with the people on the bike who are taking us in. I do a first round to see what they have there, say good morning to all my people there. Peter, the tomato guy, and Dale, the honey guy, and the lady I get my microgreens from, and it's a whole situation. And I say hi to some of the Hmong aunties, and, uncles, and grandparents who are there. People I've known since I started shopping there over a decade, 2 decades ago, something like that. Wow. I used to go with my mom and my grandmother to the Thursday market, and then kind of expanded onto that Saturday market. After the farmers market, I usually hit up a few locally owned grocery stores. We have a really great locally owned grocery store system. Now, I don't have proof of this. I'm actually in the middle of this research project right now where I'm trying to track if we can build community journalism ecosystems that map what we know to be about food systems ecosystems. But what I will say is this. I've lived in St. Paul. I've lived in a lot of different places. And when I think about ecosystems in St. Paul and in Minneapolis, which for anybody from there, the Twin Cities, these are sister cities. They are right across the river from each other. You can see Minneapolis from your house in St. Paul. It's right there. You'll take University Avenue and you just cross over from St. Paul into Minneapolis. It's just part of how we're built there. This is a community where our farmers, our seed sharers, our community gardeners, our grocery stores. We have a huge food co-op culture. We have dozens of farmers markets. The St. Paul Farmers Market alone has about 24 farmers markets, Tuesday through Sunday. The only day they are closed is Monday. So you've got about 24 markets there, the regular weekend markets. Wow. They have the indoor market, which operates most days of the week now. And then you have all of the rest of their markets in various communities, various neighborhoods. They're not mobile. They'll stay there every week for that time. There's the Hmong Market. It's a farmer's market that just opened up last year, I believe. And it's the Hmong community started a 7-day-a-week farmer's market because the Hmong people, when they immigrated to the U.S. as refugees and they came in, and the Hmong men specifically had been in the secret war on Laos. They'd been paid by the U.S. Army, right? So they're thought of as veterans. They're not treated by the state as veterans in all the full way or by the country, but they're treated as veterans. So Hmong, H-M-O-N-G, because a lot of people are not familiar with that community. The largest population of Hmong people outside of, I believe, Southeast Asia, they don't have a country, right? They went where the growing was, where they could grow, and they traveled in those mountains, right? Is in Minneapolis and in St. Paul. In fact, it's within a specific, 2 square mile area of St. Paul, right? Whoa. There's a large population of Hmong people in California, but there's a huge population in St. Paul. They are growing so much and bringing so many of their skills here that the farmers market was not enough of a space for them to grow in. They literally had to start, it's a community market, and there's a lot of Hmong groceries and Hmong cultural things and Hmong restaurants, and you can go there and be part of that. It's phenomenal. But we also have Vietnamese populations, and all of these growers have brought something to Minnesota. There's a really cool group out of St. Paul called I think it's the Hmong American Farmers Collective, Farmers Association. It's a co-op, nonetheless. It's a Hmong American Farmers cooperative. I reported on them years ago for Prism, and they bought land, and they're supporting each other and growing. Because a lot of these folks started with backyard gardens, right, and needed more permanent space. And I don't know if we have the healthiest ecosystem, because I haven't measured that. I've only ever been a recipient of that and a community organizer in that ecosystem, where I'm helping to organize people's access and working to make sure there's just policy and teaching people how to use the power of our relationships to push forward towards a more just food system for all. So I can't 100% say if it's a healthy ecosystem, but I do think it's a system that is functioning for what we need it to do, where resilience is built into it, where people have options to take care of each other, and that sense of belonging to each other, and that sense of if you've ever been to the Minnesota State Fair, you'll see in our agriculture building and across our locally represented restaurants at the State Fair, how many of those places are getting local corn, local produce, locally grown cranberries, the apples at the agriculture building, produce, and having a healthy ecosystem and investing in the science of farming, but also in the access to food that we need is such a big part of our culture. Now, I'm not saying we do it perfectly. I love our locally grown grocery stores more than most people, and I love our co-ops. I've been a member of my local co-op since I was in college. I think I joined Mississippi Market in 2007. And I have been to Kowalski's Market, which is our local grocery store, probably more than anybody who's ever shopped there. 2 or 3 times a week, I would go because I'm shopping for my mom, my grandmother, aunts. We're going a few times a week. Even now that our local one in our neighborhood closed down, I still drive 15 minutes out. And none of them are affordable, right? It's not, they're expensive. We have to budget for it. It's a thing. I'm not saying we do it perfectly. I'm not saying it's fully accessible. Right. I'm not even saying our farmers markets are super accessible. Everything is more expensive. It's not helped right now by the price of everything, right? What I am saying is what's really special to me about that ecosystem is how the access is a huge piece of it. We have access to so much more than I have been to Pike Place Market, Union Square, and Andersonville Farmers Market in Chicago, the old Scottsdale Farmers Market. I went to farmers markets in different countries, and it's still my favorite food ecosystem and farmers markets place in the world. Project Sweetie Pie, what they're doing, teaching young people to grow. The Appetite for Change in North Minneapolis, which is teaching young people how to cook healthy food using locally grown produce and then sell that, first at Breaking Bread, their old cafe, and now at the food truck. The work that the people at Cookie Cart are doing, teaching young people how to run food businesses. The work that Brightside Produce is doing, taking the produce that's being grown in North Minneapolis and then distributing it to local businesses, including local corner stores and convenience stores, so people have healthy options. The work that Pillsbury United is doing at Oak Park to create kind of a mobile greenhouse for people to grow in. The creativity, the sense of resilience, the sense of experimentation, the sense of investment, the sense of access is important, and the sense of let's have different levels of this, right? Feels so healthy to me.
Right. What I'm hearing is that sense of resilience in part comes from the diversity.
Yes.
It can't be any one organization that's actually, holding up a community. It's the community that holds itself up, and the interconnection between everyone.
100%.
Providing that support. So, yeah, thanks for sharing about that.
I could talk a lot about food systems in Minneapolis and St. Paul.
In your article that you shared with me, Know Thy Neighbor, you highlighted the voice of Ricardo Levins Morales, a resistance and caretaking movement artist, organizer, and elder based in Minneapolis. Levins Morales compared existing mutual aid networks to mycelium, interconnected fungal networks which spread beneath the soil. Like this, he said, quote, Minnesota's mutual aid network is decentralized and interconnected. It moves directly where it's needed, end quote. So I want to jump off of this comparison in asking you how that ecological systems thinking applies in a setting of social justice and community organizing.
Yeah. I think Ricardo's metaphor is the most brilliant organizing metaphor I've really heard. You know, I was kind of raised in an organizing space where organizing was very systemic. It wasn't a challenge to systems of oppression necessarily because it was so firmly built into those systems. We were modeling the same thing we were trying to take change in a lot of ways. Now, I'm not saying the skills and tools I learned were very effective. I think they were. I think a lot of what we've been seeing in recent years is a challenge to those systems and tools. We want to change the system and get rid of the tools at the same time, even though the tools, like relational tools, they work, right? Mm-hmm. What Ricardo is challenging within the organizing sphere is this idea that, like, we are still community organizers. We still build relationships. We still build relationships so we can build power. That my power and your power means we are more powerful together. That we are part of a connection. We are mutually connected and mutually dependent on each other.
Right.
But what we see in Minneapolis and St. Paul, so this food systems work right now is very much, it's not in that below ground space. It is flourishing above ground. It is a garden with so many different things growing. But what people don't see is what happens in the roots underneath the soil. How many connections are being built? How many relationships are being built? How many people have failed but became mulch for soil and compost for the soil? You know, they don't see all the work that went into doing something wrong the first 3 times because you knew if you did it the 4th time you'd get it right, whether it was growing or policy, right? Failure is compost. But what Ricardo says, there's the theorists Deleuze and Guattari talk about the idea of a rhizome, right?
Okay,
and in a lot of my journalism, I talk about rhizomatic journalism. And this is very much in that same vein of, you know, what happened in Minneapolis and St. Paul, for example, with the Operation Metro Surge was, which was the federal immigration crackdown in 2026. So much of what we built came about because of the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. Right. Mutual aid networks, I'll do your laundry, you're scared to leave the house. Let me get your groceries type situation. Let me take care of you, you'll take care of me. Or you're a medic at George Floyd Square, so let me be the one who takes care of your kids while you go out and take care of our neighbors.
Wow.
Right.
That started back in 2020.
Well, it was in 2020, but the roots of that came out before 2020, after other emergencies and incidents of state violence that have happened in Minnesota after Philando Castile was killed. He distributed school lunch, right? And people organized to pay, and he used to give students who were struggling free meals. People organized to pay off the lunches in his school district for all of the students who had school lunch debt, right? Every time we learn from each other. And so what's happening now, this isn't like me. There's a lot of me sitting down with you and we're building relationships and we're doing the thing and we're connecting and we're collaborating and we're it's a very formal, official thing.
Sure.
But so much of what also happens in Minnesota is knowing your neighbor and then being able to say, hey, my neighbor needs this and I do this. One of my favorite examples out of Minnesota is a group called Singing Resistance. And people were in January and February were stuck in their houses. They were scared to leave. Renee Good had been killed. Alex Preddy had been killed. People were scared. People were losing. Kids were scared to walk to the buses. Teachers were having to go out to take the kids to buses, not just to make sure they got on the buses safely, but to make sure that immigration didn't try and pick up any of the kids or their families at the end of the school day. And singing resistance, new people were not leaving their homes. They were scared to leave their homes. So they got together and they started singing songs and poetry. They took a Nikita Gill song poem and they turned it into a song. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's so lovely. And they'd walk through the streets of Minneapolis and sing in a round, walking down these streets, so people wouldn't feel alone. Because it was what they could bring to the movement was, you're not alone, let me sing to you while you're here.
Wow.
And they practice in a church, right? Or on the day of the mass general strike, the biggest general strike in 100 years in Minnesota's history, huge general strike. Over almost 1,000 businesses, maybe over 1,000 businesses, local businesses participated in the general strike. Museums, cultural centers, restaurants and businesses that were struggling shut down for the strike. Modern Times Cafe, which was at the time a locally owned business, is now, they went to a pay what you can model for a while with the employees volunteering. Anybody could get food except for if you were an immigration agent or worked for the federal government in anything related to immigration.
Fair
and
enough.
now they're going to become an employee-owned cafe. It's Postmodern Times Cafe. These people were stepping up, and on the day of that general strike, I remember about, I don't remember how many faith leaders it was, but it was dozens of faith leaders went to the airport to protest and sing. And keep in mind, it was -50 with wind chill that day. So this general strike with a huge rally of over 10,000 people, we know the number was likely close to 50,000, but we know of at least 10,000 people who participated. That's the minimum number documented.
Yeah.
They went out in -50-degree temperatures to march and to strike and to pray and to sing. And I will never forget about the fact that this wasn't organized because you and I sat down for coffee. So there's a really traditional organizing tool called a one-to-one.
Okay.
And we talk about it as like the most important tool that an organizer needs to learn how to do. And I'm not saying organizers didn't have a huge role in creating the conditions for which people felt comfortable connecting with each other in this way. And because probably underneath the roots layer was the organizer layer, where organizers have been building the ecosystems for all these connections for generations, right? And so we have this culture in which taking care of your neighbor, organizing with your neighbor is just built into who we are as a society, right? As a community.
Yeah.
So that was like the roots are actually above that organizer and that kind of narrative structure that belongs in Minnesota. But so much of this was signal chats that began in 2020 when George Floyd was murdered, and in the uprising and the riots after. And those signal chats just coming back to life and being like, how do we take care of each other? This was people organizing with, if you have 10 houses on your block, you were organizing with the 10 houses on your block. If you were in a cul-de-sac, you were organizing with the cul-de-sac. If you were in an apartment building, you were organizing with the people in the apartment complex. People were just organizing where they were at with their neighbors, and then the organizers and the people connecting would then take it over to the next block. The idea of whistles, that became something so much bigger than just, right? It started with people using it on 1 or 2 blocks, and suddenly became the whole city. But we learned that from Portland, Oregon. And Portland, Oregon learned the whistles from Chicago, right? And Tucson learned the whistles from Minneapolis, St. Paul. Because I talked with an organizer in my article. They learned about the whistles and how to use them as an organizing tool from St. Paul.
Wow.
Right? It's people learning from each other and people connecting with each other and relationships guiding everything.
That's like nothing could be more grassroots than that. That really speaks to me. So when something is, so local, so grassroots, and you are just organizing with those people right next to you in your periphery, what does effective leadership look like in those settings?
We talk about leaders in the organizing field. So community organizers are the people at the back of the room who have made sure that the people who are in the room know how to make best use of the space that they're in. They have the tools they need. If they have learning that they need to do so they can take an action, that the people who can teach them how to use those skills or develop those skills are in the room. I've participated in a few civil disobedience as an organizer, and we'd have to make sure the lawyer was in the room, and an organizer would make sure the lawyer was there and could answer people's questions, right? Mm-hmm. We were connectors, we were teachers, we were mentors, we were advisors, we were functionaries and facilitators who made sure the spaces that got built needed to be built. But we didn't do that by doing the work ourselves. We were also distributors. Hey, you have this skill. You should use this skill and bring it to the space in this way. Like, I have a student in class cap who's really good at making bread. And one of the things that came out of that course was, if you know how to make bread and you like to feed people, yes, you are a community organizer, because what you need to do then is, you teach people how to make bread, they can keep feeding each other. Mm-hmm. You bring food to the meetings because the meeting should always have food in it. Right? You work with the organizers to make that happen. Nice. You help organize the space so that people can feed each other in that meeting, right? Maybe you bring the bread, other people bring, the things for sandwiches. You create a space where people connect with each other. Leaders are the people at the front of the room, right? They keep people activated. Organizers and leaders are two sides of the same coin. You need both of them. So you need the strategy and the intention and the ability of organizers to see 1,000 feet ahead, 100 feet ahead, and 10 feet ahead. And you need leaders who can keep people activated, excited, and mobilized for 10 feet ahead, 100 feet ahead, and 1,000 feet ahead. And you need leaders and organizers to work together to check in and assess and figure out, okay, this is what we need next. And then to divvy up the responsibilities. Mm-hmm. You need leaders who mentor organizers. You need organizers who are there to mentor leaders. Sometimes organizers become leaders and leaders become organizers. It's just part of the work. You need mentors. You need apprentices. You need people to learn from each other. It's a very relational way of operating. Leaders and organizers need each other. You can't have one without the other.
My next question for you, Cirien, is how do different forms of social governance within community organizing affect the intersection between social equity and sustainability?
Yeah. I think a lot about Sweetie Pie. Mm-hmm. Sweetie Pie is a really cool intergenerational group. You have elders in the community, Black and brown elders, organizers and leaders, folks who brought the organization and birthed that into being. You have young people who are at the school, who are trying to figure out their own place in the world and are learning to be the growers of what is there now. You have folks in that middle space who are providing, I used to provide workshops on strategic communications to them, right? I was in that middle space of what does this community need and how can I be present in this space in that way? There's no model that's perfect for that impact, that intersection of social equity and social governance. But I think groups like Sweetie Pie, some of the community newspapers, Minnesota Women's Press has a really interesting community journalism model, but I always think about community journalism as a tool for community organizing. Yeah. So they've got Minnesota Women's Press, which is currently owned by Mickey Morissette. They just celebrated their 40th anniversary. Mickey's fantastic. They have a spin-off project called Changemakers Alliance. And Changemakers Alliance is they have online news. The Minnesota Women's Press is print, with some online as well. But you have the online news. You have a group of leaders from across Minnesota who provide access to people and ideas and story articles and anything like that that will support the work of the Minnesota Women's Press. Mm-hmm. In turn, Minnesota Women's Press and Changemakers Alliance gives a platform to these movements so that they have a space to get their stories out, but do so in a way through that kind of like a community editorial pipeline. There is so much. You've got these community leaders, you've got the editors, the editorial staff, the writers, the volunteers. And it's such an interesting model for me where everybody kind of has a say in the same way in Sweetie Pie. Everybody who's part of the group has a say because there's a space for that person to belong to. Whether it's you belong as an editor, a fact checker, a volunteer, a gardener, a board member, a consultant, a writer, somebody who goes to the meetings and takes notes and shares your perspective. These are two very different organizations, but they have a model in which everybody has a role in the work.
Totally.
And everybody has a space. And when I think about social equity, governance, sustainability, what I think about is the idea that we have to create space for everybody to feel like they have a say in determining their own future, the future of their community. They have a voice in it. They believe that their voice is valued and honored. They're able to use their own skills and their own power, but they're also able to develop skills and power. And all of it comes with mentorship and shared vision. That shared vision is so important, and I think we lose track of it so quickly.
So, Cirien, what sort of things do you think cause or contribute to us losing track of that shared vision?
Yeah. I think when we have systems and policies that take away people's sense of power or people's sense of having their own destiny that they have control over, I think in communities where people feel like the systems don't care for them, that happened in North Minneapolis. What's happening with Sweetie Pie is rebuilding a shared vision.
Right.
What's happening with Appetite for Change there, with Cookie Cart, with Pillsbury United, it's people building a shared vision. I remember I did a story interviewing Sammy McDowell in North Minneapolis a few years ago. Sammy passed away last year. He owned a coffee shop there, Sammy's Avenue Eatery. Members of his family are running it now. I can't wait to go back this summer and have a breakfast sandwich there because it's the best one I've ever had. And Sammy started this coffee shop. It's got to be almost 15 years ago now. I can't remember the exact time. I interviewed him for a profile years ago. And what I really loved about what Sammy did was there was no coffee shops in the time in North Minneapolis. Sammy started Sammy's because the community needed a space to come together and to gather and for people to have a safe place to go to. What people didn't know was when Sammy started Sammy's, he didn't know how to make coffee.
Oh.
So that first week, people would go behind the counter, they'd make coffee. He started selling locally made pie slices because people were like, you need to have food here. And they'd bring locally made pie. Somebody else was like, I made soup. Here, sell it. And it became a way for, these cottage businesses, these kitchen businesses, but then Sammy, who had no idea how to make coffee, to become part of a shared space and a shared vision. It was rebuilding shared vision. I think what happens when I mentioned earlier that bridge between people and place, I think when that bridge is disrupted, people lose sense of a shared vision and a shared reality sometimes where we all belong to something together. And I think we're seeing it more and more right now in the U.S., but also just in our local communities, even in Prescott, where there's not a sense of shared reality, shared vision, shared ownership for a collective well-being, right? We all think there's so much of this, we need to protect ourselves, that we forget we also need to protect each other.
So my last question for you today, Cirien, is food justice a path towards greater personal and collective freedom? And also, what else is a path towards greater personal and collective freedom?
Yeah. I think I mentioned earlier that I have done organizing around all sorts of issues. Land use and transit, small business development, and political organizing and immigration justice. And a huge part of my work right now is around media justice. But one of my favorite projects that I'm working on right now is actually for the college, and it's our Peas and Justice Community Cookbook. First edition came out last year. Second edition will come out this year. Super excited for the recipes. Super excited to see our community voice come through for food. Also super excited to feed people. One of the things that I think I believe deep down in my soul, at my core, is that food is fuel for our movements. Having a meeting without food is akin to, it's a business meeting. You need to have food at those movements. People need to feel welcome there. Celebrate the birthdays, celebrate the mourning, celebrate the losses, celebrate the wins. Have food at the center of those meetings. But one of the things that I really love about food justice organizing is that it's a collector. We can see each other in food justice organizing in ways that it can be hard to see with transit, immigration, media, land use, education organizing, any of them. In food justice organizing, we are all recipients of food and we are all givers of food. We have all of that in us. We are participants in a shared process together that I think while we are participants in all those other shared processes, it's harder to see ourselves at that table. The first thing I was taught by my organizing mentor at the time, Ned Moore, and my organizing teacher at the time, Salvador Miranda, I'd been an organizer for a few years but didn't have language for it. But when I went through my apprenticeship in 2010, they said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And that became such a defining feature. And even though they weren't talking specifically about food justice organizing, that idea that like we gather around a table together. Well, why do you gather around the table? You gather around the table for shared meals. And from those shared meals, you create connections where it's like, oh, this injustice is happening here. And it's not food justice organizing, but because we came together around a shared meal, we're getting to know our neighbor. We're learning about the fact that this issue is happening. I think food justice centers so much of what we can do, and it creates so much space for dialogue and so much space for healthy ecosystems. Because when you have a healthy food systems ecosystem, now I'm not saying everything that we do in our food systems and food justice ecosystem in the Twin Cities is healthy, because there's a lot of ways we can be better. But it means there's a sense of resilience that's built into it. It means that, think about it, our farmers markets that's our farmers. You've got the people who work for the farmers market associations. You've got the people who are the local businesses around those farmers markets who benefit from the weekly markets, right? You've got the pedicabs who can come out and people get paid by the farmers market and in tips to bike people back and forth so that the farmers market is physically accessible for people. You've got our Christmas tree farms. You've got the growers at the University of Minnesota, right, who are supporting work. You've got Minnesota Grown. Minnesota Grown supports a lot of the work of our grocery stores and farms and farmers markets in Minnesota, right? Because we have such a healthy farmers market and farm ecosystem, and again, it's not perfect, and there's a lot of ways we can be better, but then we have grocery stores that strive to buy and sell local produce. It's part of it. So I go into a lot of grocery stores in a lot of different cities and states, including Prescott, where locally grown is an offshoot. It's not out there in the same way. It's not public where it's like, this is locally grown apples, peaches, tomatoes, cucumbers, zucchini. It's not as public. It's not as out there in front of people as in like, this is locally grown. Like, this is the same thing you would get at the farmer's market. Literally at the Minneapolis farmer's market, there's a farmer there that they sell at the farmer's market and they sell to our local grocery stores, and our local grocery stores become hubs for that same produce that's being sold at the farmer's market. The co-ops are doing the same thing. And so I think that sense of food justice, that sense of resilience, that sense of multiple distribution angles, that sense of relationship, that sense of connection, food is both it's that food justice movement, and how do we make that better, and how do we build space for everybody to have access to equitable, healthy, affordable food, right? And I think affordability is the area in Minnesota where we really struggle the most, right? And where we have to do a lot of work there. But it's also a space for people to be like, hey, I'm struggling here, and this person, I'm struggling here. And we come together and we figure out how we can support each other in this separate way. It's why with Operation Metro Surge, the response to so much of this was, oh, you need groceries? Let me buy your groceries for you. I will buy the groceries and drop them off to you so that you have groceries, right? Or these restaurants are struggling and people are going to lose their jobs and people are too scared to go out to eat. So let's figure out how to support our local restaurants, right? Whether it's people who did feel comfortable leaving the house, going out and buying takeout that they would distribute to their neighbors, right? So that their neighbors could eat, the restaurant would get some food. Or whether it was now the legislature organizing for policy to support those local businesses that were most impacted, right? Whatever we could do, food is such a connector. It's the one bridge that I think we all feel like we can cross over. And when we cross that bridge, we get to see that there's so much more on the other side.
We get a sense of community. And almost, I think what I'm hearing from you is that sense of community is that path towards greater personal and collective freedom.
Yes. Community is everything.
Thank you so much for listening to Chapter 3 of Ecological Curiosities. Once again, I am Rain Boris.
And I'm Cirien Saadeh.
Stay ecologically minded and stay curious. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent.